On the morning of what should have been the happiest day of his life, Michael Collins received a text message that would shatter everything he believed about love, trust, and the woman he was about to marry. Just 2 hours before walking down the aisle, he discovered evidence of a betrayal so devastating that it would transform his dream wedding into a nightmare that 300 guests would never forget. The bride's mother had tried to warn him the night before, whispering words that made his blood run cold. But Michael thought it was just pre-wedding nerves and cold feet. He was wrong. What happened next at St. Catherine's Church that sunny September morning would become the talk of the entire town for years to come. Before we continue with this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Michael Collins was the kind of man every mother wanted for her daughter. At 28, he owned a successful construction business, coached Little League on weekends, and had never forgotten a birthday or anniversary. His friends called him the golden boy of Cedar Falls, the small town where everyone knew everyone's business. He was honest to a fault, sometimes too trusting, and believed that love could conquer anything. That belief would be tested in ways he never imagined. Sarah Martinez was the town's beauty, with dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets and a smile that could light up any room. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and patients adored her gentle touch and caring nature. But beneath that angelic exterior, Sarah carried a secret that would destroy not just her relationship, but the very foundation of trust that Michael had built his life upon. She was the kind of woman who knew how to make people believe exactly what she wanted them to believe. Margaret Martinez, Sarah's mother, was a woman who had lived long enough to recognize the signs that others missed. At 55, she had survived her own share of heartbreak and betrayal. She worked nights cleaning offices downtown, and during those quiet hours she often saw things that others preferred to keep hidden. Margaret loved her daughter, but she also understood that love sometimes meant making the hardest choices of all. The night before the wedding, she would face a decision that would haunt her forever. The rehearsal dinner at Romano's restaurant had been perfect. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked in celebration, and Michael felt like the luckiest man alive. As guests began to leave around 10 p.m., Margaret approached him in the parking lot. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she placed them on his shoulders, and her usually warm brown eyes were filled with a sadness he had never seen before. "Michael, I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "My daughter, she's not who you think she is. There are things you don't know, things that will break your heart if you discover them after it's too late." Michael felt his stomach drop, but he forced a laugh, thinking this was just typical mother-in-law anxiety. "Mrs. Martinez, everyone gets nervous before a wedding. Sarah loves me and I love her. That's all that matters. If you're still watching, drop a comment with, 'I'm still here,' so we know who's riding this case out with us." Margaret's grip tightened on his shoulders. "Love isn't always enough, son. Sometimes we love people who aren't capable of loving us back the way we deserve. I've watched my daughter make choices that aren't the choices of someone ready for marriage." She pressed a small envelope into his hand. "If you truly want to know who you're marrying, look inside this tomorrow morning. But only if you're prepared for your world to change forever." Michael stared at the envelope, feeling its weight like a lead brick in his palm. "What's in here?" he asked, but Margaret was already walking away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "The truth," she called back without turning around. "The truth that I should have told you months ago, but I kept hoping she would change. Some people never change, Michael. Some people just get better at hiding who they really are." Michael woke up at 6 a.m. in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house, the envelope sitting on his nightstand like a ticking bomb. He had stared at it for hours the night before, turning it over and over in his hands, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. This was his wedding day. Sarah was getting ready across town, probably surrounded by her bridesmaids, laughing and taking pictures. Everything was perfect. Why would he want to ruin that? He decided to focus on getting ready instead. His black tuxedo hung pressed and waiting in his closet. His mother had prepared his favorite breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, and his father kept making jokes to calm his nerves. At 8 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Can't wait to be your wife today. I love you more than words can say." Michael smiled and typed back, "See you at the altar, beautiful. Today is our forever." But as he was getting dressed at 9 a.m., the envelope seemed to call to him from across the room. Margaret's words echoed in his mind, "Some people just get better at hiding who they really are." His hands shook as he picked up the envelope and slowly tore it open. Inside was a folded piece of paper with an address written in Margaret's handwriting. Riverside Motel, room 237. Go there now if you want to see what I couldn't tell you. Michael's heart began to race. Riverside Motel was on the other side of town, a rundown place that most people avoided. What could possibly be there that Margaret needed him to see? He looked at his watch. 9:15 a.m. The wedding was at 11 a.m., which gave him just enough time to drive across town and back. Against every instinct telling him to stay away, Michael grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He had to know. Whatever Margaret wanted him to see, he had to know before he promised to love Sarah for the rest of his life. If you're still watching, remember to subscribe to enjoy more of this. The Riverside Motel looked even worse in daylight than it did at night. Paint peeled from the walls and half the neon letters in the sign were burned out. Michael parked his car and walked toward room 237, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He raised his hand to knock but stopped when he heard voices inside. One of them was unmistakably Sarah's voice, but she wasn't alone. "We have to be careful," Sarah was saying. "The wedding is in 2 hours, and if anyone finds out about us now, everything will be ruined." A man's voice responded, a voice that Michael recognized with a sickening realization. It was Derek, Sarah's cousin, who had flown in from California for the wedding. "I know, baby. But after today we'll have to be even more careful. You'll be married to him and people will be watching." Michael pressed his ear against the door, his entire world crumbling with every word. "I don't love him," Sarah continued. "I never loved him. But he's successful and he'll provide the kind of life I want. You and I can keep seeing each other just like we have been for the past 8 months. He's too trusting to ever suspect anything." Derek laughed, a cruel sound that cut through Michael like a knife. 8 months of sneaking around and he never had a clue. "You're right, he's too good for his own good. After you're married, we'll have even more opportunities. You'll have access to his money, his business connections, everything we need to start our own life together somewhere else." Michael stumbled backward from the door, his legs barely supporting him. 8 months. While he had been planning their wedding, buying her engagement ring, dreaming of their future together, Sarah had been carrying on an affair with her own cousin. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was about to promise his life to, was a complete stranger. Everything had been a lie. Their entire relationship had been built on deception and manipulation. Michael sat in his car in the motel parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at his phone. He could call the wedding off right now. He could text Sarah, tell her he knew about Derek and cancel everything. But 300 people were already gathering at the church. His family had spent thousands of dollars on this wedding. Sarah's family had traveled from across the country. If he called it off now, everyone would want explanations, and the humiliation would follow him for the rest of his life. Then a different idea began to form in his mind. If Sarah wanted to play games, if she thought he was too trusting and too naive to see through her deception, then maybe it was time to show her exactly what kind of man she was really dealing with. Michael pulled out his phone and started recording a voice memo as he drove back toward the church. He needed to document everything while it was fresh in his memory. If you're still watching, remember to subscribe to enjoy more of this. At 10:30 a.m., he arrived at St. Catherine's Church and went straight to the bride's room, where Sarah's sister Jennifer was helping with last-minute preparations. "Jennifer, I need you to do something for me," Michael said quietly. "I need you to set up the projector in the church sanctuary and make sure it's connected to my laptop. Tell everyone it's for a special surprise video I made for Sarah." Jennifer looked confused but agreed. Michael then went to find the wedding photographer, Marcus, who was setting up his equipment near the altar. "Marcus, I need you to be ready to capture everything that happens during the ceremony. Don't stop recording no matter what. This wedding is going to be memorable for reasons nobody expects." As guests filled the pews and the organist began the prelude music, Michael took his place at the altar. His best man Tom leaned over and whispered, "You look a little pale, man. Wedding nerves?" Michael managed to smile. "Something like that. But don't worry, Tom. Everything is about to become very clear for everyone." The church doors opened and the bridal procession began. Sarah's bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their lavender dresses, followed by her flower girl and ring bearer. Michael's eyes scanned the congregation, noting that Derek was sitting in the third row with the rest of Sarah's extended family. He looked relaxed and confident, probably thinking he had successfully fooled everyone. Then the wedding march began and Sarah appeared at the back of the church. She looked stunning in her white dress, her dark hair arranged in an elegant updo, her smile radiant as she looked toward Michael at the altar. For a moment, Michael almost doubted what he had heard at the motel. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had shared his dreams and his bed for 2 years. How could she be the same person who had been planning to use him and betray him? But as Sarah walked down the aisle, Michael noticed something that chilled him to the bone. As she passed the third row where Derek was sitting, their eyes met for just a split second, and she gave him the tiniest nod. It was so subtle that anyone else would have missed it, but Michael was watching for it. That tiny gesture confirmed everything he had heard at the motel. This was all an act, a performance for the benefit of everyone who believed in their love story. Sarah reached the altar and took Michael's hands, her touch feeling cold despite the warmth of the church. "You look handsome," she whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up her words. "I can't wait to be your wife." Michael looked into her eyes and saw the lie reflected there. "I can't wait either," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I think everyone here is about to see exactly what kind of wife you're going to be." Pastor Williams began the ceremony with the traditional words about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. Michael listened to the familiar words, thinking about how different they sounded when you knew they were being spoken over a foundation of lies. When the pastor reached the part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, Michael raised his hand. "Actually, Pastor Williams, I have something I'd like to share with everyone before we continue," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly throughout the church. Sarah looked confused, and a murmur went through the congregation. "I made a special video for my bride, and I think this is the perfect time to show it to everyone. If you're still watching, drop a comment with, 'I'm still here,' so we know who's riding this case out with us." Michael nodded to Jennifer, who pressed play on the laptop connected to the projector. But instead of a romantic video montage, the screen filled with audio recordings Michael had made of the conversation he overheard at the Riverside Motel. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps echoed through the church, and people began looking around at each other in shock. Sarah's face went white and she grabbed Michael's arm. "What is this? What are you doing?" Derek started to stand up from his pew, but Sarah's father, a large man named Roberto, was already moving toward him with fury in his eyes. "This," Michael said, his voice now amplified by the church's sound system, "is what I discovered this morning when Sarah's own mother gave me the address where my fiancée and her cousin have been meeting for 8 months. He looked directly at Sarah. "Did you really think I was too stupid to figure out that you were using me? That this whole wedding was just part of your plan to get access to my money and my business?" Chaos erupted in the church. Roberto had reached Derek and was shouting at him in rapid Spanish while other family members tried to hold him back. Sarah's bridesmaids were crying, and guests were talking loudly among themselves, trying to process what they had just heard. Sarah herself stood frozen at the altar, her white dress suddenly seeming like a mockery of everything a wedding dress was supposed to represent. "How long have you known?" she finally asked Michael, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "I found out this morning," Michael replied. "Your mother tried to warn me last night, but I didn't listen. I thought she was just being overprotective. I wish I had opened that envelope earlier." Margaret pushed through the crowd and approached the altar, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she said. "I should have told you months ago, but she's my daughter, and I kept hoping she would come to her senses. I couldn't let you marry her without knowing the truth." Michael took Margaret's hand. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Martinez. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Sarah finally found her voice. "Michael, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but I can change. We can start over." Michael looked at her for a long moment, seeing clearly for the first time the person she really was beneath the beautiful exterior. "No, Sarah. We can't. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. For 8 months you chose to lie to me, to deceive me, to plan a future based on using me. Those weren't mistakes. Those were who you are." Michael removed his boutonniere and placed it on the altar, then walked down the aisle and out of the church. Behind him he could hear Sarah calling his name, but he didn't turn around. As he reached the parking lot, Tom caught up with him. "Man, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" Michael took a deep breath of the crisp September air and managed a small smile. "You know what, Tom? I think I'm going to be better than okay. I just dodged the biggest bullet of my life." 6 months later, Michael was rebuilding his life piece by piece. The scandal had rocked their small town for weeks, but eventually, people moved on to other gossip. Sarah had left Cedar Falls shortly after the wedding disaster, and Michael heard through mutual friends that her relationship with Derek had ended badly once the thrill of secrecy was gone. Margaret still sent him Christmas cards, and they occasionally ran into each other at the grocery store, where she would always apologize again for her daughter's behavior. The experience had changed Michael in fundamental ways. He was more cautious now, less willing to trust blindly, but he had also learned the difference between love and manipulation. How would you have reacted if you discovered that your entire relationship was built on lies? Would you have had the courage to expose the truth in front of 300 people, or would you have quietly called off the wedding? And what about Margaret's difficult choice to betray her own daughter in order to protect an innocent man? Sometimes the people who love us most have to make the hardest decisions to save us from ourselves. Michael's story reminds us that trust is the foundation of any real relationship, and when that foundation is cracked, everything built on top of it will eventually crumble. The truth may be painful, but it's always better than living a lie. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories like this. Remember, in every relationship, there are warning signs if we're willing to see them. The question is, are you brave enough to face the truth when it's staring you in the face? Because sometimes, the most painful revelations are also the most liberating ones.